Hey guys, tonight we slip into the forgotten world of medieval herbalists and healers, where the air hums with the scent of crushed lavender and simmering roots. Picture yourself standing in a dim, timber-framed hut, shelves sagging under jars of dried leaves and strange powders. A fire crackles, casting shadows on a worn table where a healer grinds herbs with a mortar and pestle, muttering old chants. This isn't some fairy tale apothecary, it's a gritty, life-or-death craft, and if you cut your leg on a rusty plough, you probably won't survive this without their help. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I love knowing where you're drifting off from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push open the creaky door of the herbalist's workshop, and a wave of earthy aromas hits you: mint, sage, and something sharper, like crushed nettle. The medieval world leans hard on these healers, ordinary folks who wield plants like weapons against fevers, wounds, and mysterious aches. They're not doctors in white coats. They're neighbors, midwives, or wise old women who know which roots stop bleeding and which berries might kill you. Their role is massive hospitals don't exist yet, and the nearest physician, if you can afford one, is probably days away, riding a donkey and charging a fortune. Most folks turn to the local herbalist, whose knowledge comes from generations of trial and error, passed down like a family recipe for questionable stew. You step closer, your boots scuffing on the dirt floor, and take in the workshop's chaos. Bundles of dried herbs hang from the rafters, their brittle leaves brushing your head as you duck. A clay pot simmers on the fire, bubbling with a murky brew that smells like damp forest floor. The herbalist, let's call her Agnes, glances up, her hands stained green from chopping yarrow. She's not just mixing plants. She's balancing life and death, a mainstream fact by the 12th century. Herbalism was the backbone of medieval medicine, with texts like the Physica by Hildegard of Bingen cataloguing hundreds of plants and their uses. Agnes might not read Latin, but she knows chamomile soothes a colicky baby, and willow bark eases a fever knowledge that's basically proto-ibuprofen. You can almost hear her muttering, willow for pain, fennel for bloat, as she sorts her ingredients with the precision of a chef. But it's not all science. You spot a quirky detail, a small charm, a twig wrapped in red thread, tucked behind a jar. Agnes swears it wards off evil spirits that cause toothaches. Superstition weaves through her work like ivy. Half her cures rely on chants or moon phases. Historians still argue whether these rituals were psychological boosts or just medieval placebo. But you can't deny the vibe. You're standing in a world where a stomachache might be blamed on a witch's curse. And Agnes's job is to fix it, whether with fennel seeds or a whispered prayer. You watch her fingers, calloused and quick, as she ties another charm, her lips moving silently. It's half medicine, half theater, and it's keeping the village alive. You linger by her table, watching her sort through a pile of roots. Some are familiar garlic, rosemary, but others look like they belong in a witch's cauldron. She points to a gnarled lump and says it's mandrake, dug up at midnight to avoid its scream. Yeah, that's the kind of wild belief you're dealing with. A joke to lighten the mood. Why did the medieval herbalist always carry a knife? Because you never know when you'll need to fend off a rogue mandrake or a nosy neighbor. The truth is, her knife is for harvesting, scraping, and surviving a world where a bad harvest means no medicine. You notice her sharpening it on a whetstone, the rhythmic scrape blending with the fire's crackle. It's a reminder that her work is as much about precision as it is about intuition. You start to see her rhythm grind, mix, boil, repeat, Every move is deliberate, learned from years of watching her mother or grandmother do the same. The workshop feels alive, a mix of science, magic, and desperation. You're not just visiting a healer. You're stepping into a lifeline for a village that trusts Agnes more than any distant scholar. As you breathe in the herb-scented air, you realize this is no quaint hobby. It's a craft that holds the medieval world together, one poultice at a time. And honestly, if you're hoping to survive that rusty plow injury, you'd better stick close to Agnes and her weird little charms. You wander to a corner where a small window lets in slivers of daylight, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Outside, you glimpse the village mud-streaked houses, a cart creaking by, a child chasing a goose. This is Agnes's world, where every cough or cut brings someone to her door. She's not just a healer, she's a counselor, a confidant, and occasionally, the only one brave enough to handle a feverish patient no one else will touch. Another joke, why don't medieval herbalists take sick days because the plants don't stop growing, and neither do the village's problems? You can almost feel the weight of her role, the endless demands of a community with no safety net. The shelves catch your eye again, lined with clay pots and glass vials, some cracked but still in use. Each holds a story, rosemary from a hillside, traded for a loaf of bread, chamomile plucked under a full moon for extra potency. You wonder how Agnes keeps it all straight, but she moves with the confidence of someone who's done this forever. A third joke, why's the herbalist's workshop so messy? Because organizing herbs is like herding cats with a broom. You smile. But the truth is, this chaos is her system, a living archive of cures and cautions. As you stand there, the fire pops, and Agnes hums a tune older than the hills. You're hooked, ready to follow her deeper into this fragrant, forgotten world. You leave Agnes's fragrant workshop behind, the scent of sage still clinging to your clothes, and step into the crisp dawn air of a medieval village. Today, you're joining her on a trek to gather nature's remedies, the raw materials that fuel her healing craft. The path winds through muddy lanes, past thatched roofs heavy with dew, and into the wild beyond. You're not just strolling through a meadow. This is a high-stakes scavenger hunt where one wrong leaf could mean disaster. The medieval herbalist's world hinges on knowing exactly where, when, and how to harvest plants. And you're about to see how it's done. The air feels alive with possibility, but also risk, as you follow Agnes into a world where every plant could be a cure or a curse. You trudge alongside her, her worn cloak brushing the grass, as she heads for a nearby forest. The air is cool, and birds chatter overhead. But Agnes is focused, her eyes scanning the ground like a hawk. She's after specific plants, yarrow for wounds, comfrey for broken bones, maybe some wild garlic for infections. A mainstream fact, medieval herbalists relied heavily on local flora, with texts like the Herbarium of Pseudo Apuleius listing over 100 plants, many still used in modern herbalism. Agnes doesn't have a fancy manuscript, but she knows her patch of earth better than any scholar. She points to a cluster of small white flowers, feverfew. She says, good for headaches, and kneels to snip them with her knife, the same one you saw her sharpening back in the workshop. You notice she only takes a few, leaving the rest to grow. Sustainability isn't a buzzword here, it's survival. You can't help but admire her restraint. Knowing the village depends on these plants year after year, the forest hums with life, but it's not all friendly. You sidestep a patch of stinging nettles, wincing at the thought of their bite. Agnes chuckles and says nettles are her secret weapon boiled. They soothe joint pain. It's a quirky tidbit. Medieval healers used dangerous plants like nettles or even hemlock in tiny doses, turning poison into medicine with terrifying precision. You're half impressed, half worried she might accidentally dose you with something deadly. A joke to ease the tension, and why did the herbalist bring a basket to the forest? Because grab everything and hope isn't a healing strategy. Agnes's basket is already half full, each plant carefully tucked away to preserve its potency. You notice she wraps some in damp cloth, muttering about keeping them fresh until she can dry them properly. You follow her deeper, the trees closing in, their branches casting dappled shadows. She stops by a stream, pointing to watermint growing along the bank. It's for upset stomachs, she says, but only if picked before noon any later, and it's less lively. Historians still argue whether these timing rules were based on actual plant chemistry or just superstition, but Agnes swears by them. You watch her wade into the shallow water, her skirts hiked up, snipping the mint with practiced care. It's not just about grabbing plants, it's about knowing their moods. Some herbs, like rosemary, need dry hillsides. Others, like marsh marigold, thrive in soggy ground. Agnes reads the land like a book, and you're starting to see how much skill this takes. You try to mimic her, reaching for a sprig of mint, but she gently corrects your grip too rough, and you'll bruise the leaves, ruining their potency. The sun climbs higher, and you're sweating now, hauling a bundle of herbs Agnes handed you to carry. She's relentless, moving from meadow to forest edge, pointing out plants you'd have trampled without a thought. There's burdock for skin infections, dandelion for sluggish livers, and something called eyebright for teary eyes. Each plant has a story, a use and a warning. Pick too much, and the patch dies out. Pick too little, and the village suffers. You're struck by the balance herbalists aren't just healers, they're stewards of the land. Another joke, why don't herbalists ever get lost? Because the plants always show them the way home. You laugh, but Agnes's knack for finding her way through tangled underbrush feels almost magical. You're starting to feel the rhythm of her work, the way she moves with purpose, never wasting a step. You pause by an ancient oak, its roots sprawling like gnarled fingers. Agnes kneels to dig up a small, knobby root valerian, she says, for sleepless nights. You're tempted to ask for some yourself, but she's already moving on, muttering about the best spots for elderflower. The work is grueling hours of bending, digging, and dodging thorns, but Agnes doesn't complain. This is her lifeblood, the foundation of every poultice and potion back in that workshop you visited. You notice she avoids certain plants, like a patch of deadly nightshade, its glossy berries tempting but lethal. Knowing what not to pick is as crucial as knowing what to gather. You ask her about it, and she gives you a knowing look, mistake nightshade for belladonna. And you're brewing death instead of medicine. As you head back toward the village, your arms ache from carrying her haul. The basket overflows with green and brown treasures, each one a potential cure. You realize this isn't just about plants, it's about trust. The village relies on Agnes to turn these leaves and roots into hope, whether it's for a child's fever or a farmer's infected foot. A final joke, why's the herbalist's basket always heavy? Because it's carrying the weight of the whole village's health. You glance at Agnes, her face weathered but calm, and feel a pang of respect. This is no easy job, and you're only halfway through the day. The forest fades behind you, but its lessons linger, tying you closer to this forgotten world. You can't help but wonder what happens when these plants get back to her workshop. How does she turn this chaotic bounty into actual medicine? You're back in Agnes's workshop, the basket of freshly gathered herbs from your forest trek spilling over on her table, their sharp, green scent mingling with the smoky warmth of the fire. The air hums with possibility, and you're about to see how she transforms this wild bounty into medicine that could save a life or at least ease a toothache. This isn't just tossing leaves in a pot. It's a craft that blends crude tools, sharp instincts, and a hefty dose of medieval weirdness. You lean in, watching Agnes sort through her haul, her hands moving with the confidence of someone who's done this 1,000 times. Today, you're diving into the quirky tools of the herbalist's trade, the odd contraptions and rituals that turn plants into potions and poultices, and you're already wondering how she keeps it all straight. You start with the heart of her setup, the mortar and pestle, sitting like royalty on her scarred wooden table. This isn't some decorative kitchen set, it's a heavy stone duo that grinds tough roots into powder and mashes leaves into paste. A mainstream fact, medieval herbalists depended on these tools, often handmade, with some mortars carved from wood or even bone, as noted in surviving inventories from 13th century apothecaries. Agnes's is granite, worn smooth from years of use, its surface pocked with the ghosts of countless herbs. You watch her pound dried yarrow into a fine dust, the rhythmic thump filling the room like a heartbeat. It's hypnotic, but also a reminder that every cure starts with raw physical effort. You try lifting the pestle, and it's heavier than it looks. Your arms ache after just a few grinds. Agnes smirks, saying it's not about strength, but rhythm. You're not convinced, but you're already hooked on the process. Next, your eyes catch a strange contraption, a small bronze still, its bulbous body and coiled tube looking like something from a mad alchemist's fever dream. Agnes uses it to distill plant essences, capturing their spirit in liquid form. She pours watermint into the still, explaining how the steam carries the plant's healing oils into a tiny vial. It's slow, finicky work, and you're half convinced the thing's going to explode. A joke to break the tension. Why did the herbalists still always leak? Because it's got a steamy personality. You chuckle, but Agnes doesn't. She's too focused, adjusting the fire with a poker to keep the still from overheating. This isn't just cooking, it's chemistry without a lab coat. And you're starting to see why her workshop feels like a mix of science lab and witch's lair. Then there's the knife, that same iron blade you saw her wield in the forest, its handle wrapped in worn leather. It's not just for harvesting, it's for slicing, scraping, and dicing everything from roots to bark. Agnes sharpens it daily, muttering about keeping the blade true to the plants, as if it's a partner in her work. You notice other oddities, a bone spoon for measuring powders, its surface stained from years of use, a clay pot with a spout for pouring salves, its rim chipped but still functional, and a wooden press for squeezing oil from seeds, creaking with every turn. Each tool feels personal, shaped by years of handling, and you can't help but wonder how many lives they've saved. You reach for the spoon, curious, and Agnes gently swats your hand, apparently. It's bad luck to touch her tools without permission, but it's not all practical. You catch a quirky tidbit. Agnes keeps a small iron amulet shaped like a crescent moon, which she taps against her tools before starting work. It's supposed to bless them, ensuring the remedies don't fail. Superstition maybe, but in a world where a fever can kill you by Tuesday, you don't argue with tradition. Historians still argue whether these rituals were purely symbolic or tied to early scientific observations, like aligning tasks with lunar cycles for better plant potency. You're skeptical, but when Agnes taps the amulet and murmurs a charm, the room feels heavier, like the air itself is listening. You glance at the fire, its flames dancing as if in on the secret. And suddenly, you're not so sure it's all nonsense. You move to the drying racks, where herbs hang in neat bundles, their leaves curling as they dry in the warm air. Agnes explains that timing is everything. Dry them too fast, and they lose their power. Too slow, and mold creeps in. She uses a fan made of woven reeds to keep air moving, a low-tech trick that's weirdly effective. You try waving it, and the breeze smells like a meadow trapped indoors. Another joke. Why is the herbalist's fan always busy? Because it's got to keep the herbs from getting too clingy. You grin. But the truth is, every tool here is a lifeline, turning chaotic nature into something a village can rely on. You notice Agnes adjusting the racks, spacing the bundles to avoid damp spots, her fingers quick and precise. You spot a shelf of jars, some filled with strange liquids, vinegar, wine, even honey used to preserve or mix remedies. Agnes points to a murky jar of rosehip syrup, good for coughs, and warns you not to touch the one with hemlock extract. That stuff's for external use only, unless you fancy a one-way trip to the afterlife. The precision of her work hits you every tool. Every step is about control in a world full of uncertainty. A final joke: why do herbalists love their tools? Because they're the only ones who don't talk back. You laugh. But as Agnes stirs a pot of comfrey salve, you see the quiet pride in her movements. These tools aren't just objects. They're extensions of her will, her way of wresting order from a wild and dangerous world. You're starting to feel the weight of her craft, and you're ready to see what she does with all these tools and herbs next. You're still in Agnes's workshop, the air thick with the earthy tang of herbs and the faint hiss of her bronze still. That quirky contraption you marveled at last time. The tools, mortar, knife, that odd moon amulet are now in full swing as Agnes transforms your forest hall into remedies. You're about to dive into the wild world of medieval recipes, where herbs, magic, and some downright bizarre ingredients come together in a desperate bid for survival. This isn't your grandma's chicken soup recipe. It's a strange brew of science, superstition, and stuff you'd rather not think about too hard. You pull up a wobbly stool, careful not to knock over a jar of rosehip syrup, and watch Agnes work her magic literally and figuratively, as she hums a tune that sounds older than the hills. You start with a simple recipe, a salve for cuts, a must-have when every villager seems to nick themselves on scythes, kitchen knives, or rogue nails. Agnes grabs comfrey from the drying rack, its brittle leaves crumbling under her fingers, and grinds them into a green paste with her granite mortar and pestle. She mixes it with melted beeswax and a splash of honey, muttering about binding the wound's spirit. A mainstream fact comfrey, known as knit bone, was a staple in medieval healing, valued for its ability to speed tissue repair, a use backed by early texts like the Lachnunga, a 10th century Anglo-Saxon manuscript. You watch her smear the salve onto a cloth, ready to wrap a farmer's gashed hand. It smells sweet, but looks like something dredged from a swamp, and you're half tempted to ask if it actually works. Agnes catches your skeptical look and shrugs. Her patients keep coming back, so she must be doing something right. Then things take a turn for the weird. Agnes pulls out a recipe for a fever tonic, and you're not ready for this one. She tosses in feverfew, which you recognize from your forest trek, but then adds dried toad skin and a pinch of ground bone. You blink, hoping you misheard. But nope. She's dead serious, tossing the ingredients into a pot of boiling wine. This is the quirky tidbit. Medieval recipes often included animal parts, like snake fat or cow dung, believed to channel specific healing energies. Toad skin, Agnes claims, draws out the heat of a fever. You're trying not to gag, but she's unfazed, stirring the mix with a bone spoon, its surface stained from years of use. A joke to lighten the mood. Why did the herbalist add toad to her potion? Because she wanted it to hop right to the problem. You force a smile, but you're wondering how anyone chokes this down without bolting for the nearest stream. You move on to a cough syrup recipe, hoping for something less alarming. Agnes combines horehound, a bitter herb you vaguely recall from the forest, with licorice root and a generous glug of honey. She chants softly as she stirs, something about the moon's pull on the lungs. You're starting to see a pattern. Every recipe has a ritual. Whether it's a prayer, a specific stirring direction, or a bizarre ingredient like that toad skin you're still side-eyeing. Historians still argue whether these rituals were purely symbolic or reflected early empirical knowledge, like using honey for its natural antibacterial properties. You're leaning toward placebo. But when Agnes hands you a spoonful of the syrup to taste, it's surprisingly soothing, even if the whorehound makes your tongue curl like you licked a pine cone. You cough, and she laughs, saying it's supposed to work on the lungs, not your taste buds. You glance at her recipe book, not a book, really, but a tattered stack of parchment scraps, stained with herb juices and smudged ink. It's less a cookbook and more a family diary, with notes scrawled in the margins: add more mint for colic or avoid on new moons. Some recipes are straightforward, like chamomile tea for sleepless nights, but others make your head spin. One calls for bat wings to lift a patient's spirit. Good luck sourcing that in a village with more chickens than bats. Another joke: why's the herbalist's recipe book so messy? Because it's been through more battles than a knight's shield. You chuckle, but the truth is, these recipes are a lifeline, cobbled together from the trial, error, and a lot of hope. You flip through a page and see a recipe for elf shot, a cure for pains blamed on mischievous spirits. It involves vervain and a chant, and you're starting to wonder if Agnes believes in elves or just knows her patients do. You watch her prepare a poultice for joint pain using those stinging nettles you dodged in the forest. She boils them, mixes in mustard seed, and wraps the hot mess in linen. It smells like a punishment, but she swears it works wonders for creaky knees. You're starting to get it. Medieval healing isn't just about the plants. It's about belief. The villagers trust Agnes's brews, even the ones with toad skin, because they've seen her pull people back from the brink. A final joke: why do herbalists love weird ingredients? Because normal doesn't cut it when you're fighting death with a spoon. As Agnes ties off the poultice, you realize these recipes, bizarre as they are the heart of her craft. They're a messy, magical blend of nature and nerve, keeping the village alive one strange brew at a time. You lean back, the fire crackling softly, and wonder what it's like to be the one everyone turns to when the recipes, normal or not, are all that stand between life and death. You're still lingering in Agnes's workshop, the faint smell of that nettle poultice and toad skin tonic clinging to the air like a strange perfume. But now you step outside to see how the medieval world views her. You're about to explore the social standing of herbalists like Agnes, how they're both revered and eyed with suspicion in a village where trust and fear walk a tightrope. It's not just about brewing potions. It's about navigating a community that needs her skills, but whispers about her behind closed doors. You trail her through the muddy village streets, her basket of remedies swinging at her side, and watch how people react to her presence. Every glance, every nod, tells a story of a healer caught between gratitude and gossip. You notice the baker, his hands dusted with flour, nodding respectfully as Agnes passes by. He's probably grateful for that comfrey salve that patched up his son's scraped knee last week, saving a trip to a pricey physician. In medieval society, herbalists like Agnes are often the only accessible healers, especially in rural areas where physicians are as rare as a sunny winter day. A mainstream fact by the 13th century. Herbalists filled a critical gap in medical care, serving as the go-to for everyone from peasants to minor nobles, as documented in household records from places like England and France. Agnes isn't just a healer, she's a community pillar, doling out remedies for everything from childbirth pains to cow bloat. You see a young mother clutch her baby a bit tighter as she murmurs thanks for a fever tea that broke her child's fever overnight. Agnes's skills keep the village ticking, like the heartbeat of a community that can't afford to falter. You can't help but admire her quiet authority, even if her cloak is patched and her hands are stained green, but it's not all warm fuzzies. You catch a farmer giving Agnes a sidelong glance, his lips tight, like he's weighing whether to trust her latest brew or burn it as cursed. There's a quirky tidbit: some villagers believe herbalists dabble in witchcraft, especially when their cures involve chants or that creepy mandrake root you saw back in her workshop. Suspicion clings to her like damp wool, fueled by rumors of unnatural knowledge. You overhear a whisper about Agnes curing a barren woman with a moonlit ritual sounds effective, but also like something that could land her in hot water. Historians still argue whether this distrust stemmed from genuine fear of sorcery or just jealousy of herbalists' influence, especially when they outshone university-trained physicians who charged an arm and a leg for a Latin prayer and a leech. You're starting to see why Agnes keeps that moon amulet tucked away. Better safe than sorry in a world quick to point fingers. You glance at her, wondering how she stays so calm under those wary eyes. You follow her to the market square, where she barters a jar of rosehip syrup for a sack of barley. The exchange feels warm, the stall-holder smiling as he hands over the grain, but you notice not everyone's so friendly. A wealthy merchant, his cloak trimmed with fur, brushes past without a word, his nose wrinkled like Agnes smells of trouble rather than lavender. Herbalists often straddle a weird social line valued for their cures, but kept at arm's length by those who think healer is one step from heretic. A joke to lighten the mood: why don't herbalists get invited to fancy feasts? Because nobody wants to sip toad tonic with their stew. You smirk, but the truth is, Agnes's low status keeps her grounded in the village, closer to the peasants and laborers who need her most. You see her slip a vial of chamomile tea to a widow for free, the widow's eyes softening with gratitude. And you realize Agnes's role goes beyond medicine. She's a counselor, a friend, the one who shows up when no one else does. That generosity, though, comes with risks. You linger by a stall, catching snippets of gossip about a failed remedy last spring, a child's fever that didn't break, and the family's whispers that Agnes's brew was tainted. If a cure fails, or a patient dies, the murmurs grow louder, and healer can turn to witch faster than you can say mandrake scream. Another joke: why's the herbalist always so calm? Because she's got valerian for her nerves and a village to prove wrong. You're starting to feel the weight of her position. Every remedy she hands out is a gamble, banking on trust she's never fully guaranteed. You watch her adjust her basket, her face steady despite the whispers, and it hits you. Her work isn't just about healing bodies. It's about navigating a social minefield where one wrong move could cost her everything. As you trail her back toward the workshop, you see kids playing nearby, mimicking Agnes by pretending to mix potions with sticks and mud. They giggle, but one mimics her chants a bit too loudly, earning a sharp look from a passing priest. It's a stark reminder that her work, while vital, dances on the edge of acceptance. A final joke: why's the herbalist's life like a tightrope? Because one wrong step, and the whole village might call her a sorceress. You glance at Agnes, her stride steady, her eyes scanning the horizon like she's used to weathering storms. You feel a pang of respect. She's not just brewing remedies. She's balancing a delicate role in a world that needs her but doesn't always want her. You're ready to see who else carries this burden. Maybe others like Agnes, working in the shadows of a society that can't decide whether to thank them or shun them. You're back in the village, the echo of those suspicious whispers about Agnes still lingering in your ears as you watch her slip back into her workshop, her cloak brushing the doorframe. But now, your focus shifts to the women like her, the ones shaping the healing arts despite a medieval world that often tries to box them in. You're diving into the lives of women herbalists, exploring how they wield their knowledge of plants in a society that desperately needs them, but just as often limits their power. You follow the faint scent of lavender and wood smoke, tracing the footsteps of these women who are midwives, mothers, and masters of medicine, all while dodging societal barriers That would make anyone's head spin. It's a story of resilience, and you're ready to walk in their shoes, even if those shoes are caked in forest mud. You start with Agnes herself, a widow who learned her craft from her mother, just as her mother did before her. She's not alone in this women-dominate herbalism across medieval Europe, largely because it's woven into the fabric of domestic life. A mainstream fact, women were the primary caregivers in most households, and by the 12th century, their role as healers was well established, with figures like Trotula of Salerno writing influential medical texts on women's health, some of which survive today. You see Agnes mixing a fennel tea for a pregnant woman who stops by, her hands gentle as she explains how it eases nausea. It's not just medicine, it's a moment of connection, woman to woman, in a world where men often hold the reins of authority. You're struck by how naturally she steps into this role. Her knowledge as instinctive as breathing, her voice soft but sure as she reassures the young mother. You can almost feel the warmth of the tea's steam, the quiet trust in the room, but it's not all sisterhood and sage. You catch a quirky tidbit. Women herbalists often face accusations of meddling in men's domains, especially when their cures work better than a physician's pricey leeches or bloodletting. You overhear a grumbling scholar in the village square, his robes flapping as he mutters that women like Agnes shouldn't play at medicine without proper training. Proper training, of course, means a university degree, which women are barred from pursuing in this era. It's a catch-22 that makes your blood boil, but Agnes just shrugs it off, saying, "Plants don't care for parchment." A joke to lighten the mood. Why don't women herbalists need degrees? Because the forest gives better lectures than any monk. You smirk. But the truth is, these women are outsmarting the system, using hands-on experience to outshine book-bound scholars who've never touched a nettle or boiled a feverfew tonic. You admire Agnes's quiet defiance, her way of letting her results speak louder than any diploma. You follow her to a nearby cottage, where she's meeting another healer, Marjorie, a midwife with a sharp tongue and a knack for soothing colicky babies. Marjorie's brewing a raspberry leaf tonic, swearing it strengthens women for childbirth. Her hands steady as she measures out the dried leaves. You're starting to see a network, women passing recipes, sharing secrets, and supporting each other in a world that doesn't always support them. They trade stories. 2. Marjorie laughs about a farmer who swore her salve was bewitched because it healed his foot too fast. Historians still argue whether this female-led herbalism was a form of resistance or just necessity. But you lean toward both. These women aren't just healing. They're carving out power in a society that tries to keep them small. You watch Marjorie and Agnes swap a bundle of chamomile for some licorice root, their laughter cutting through the cottage's smoky air. And it feels like a quiet rebellion against a world that undervalues their work. The barriers, though, are real and daunting. You learn that women herbalists often work in the shadows, avoiding attention that could draw trouble from authorities or neighbors. If a cure fails, or a baby doesn't survive childbirth, they're quicker to face blame than their male counterparts, who can hide behind titles or guild memberships. You recall those village whispers about Agnes and witchcraft, and now you see how gender sharpens the suspicion. Another joke, why's a woman herbalist's life so tricky? Because she's got to cure the patient and dodge the pitchforks? You chuckle. But it's grim. Marjorie tells you about a healer in a nearby town, accused of sorcery after a noble's son died under her care. Her workshop burned to the ground as punishment. It's a stark reminder that knowledge can be a dangerous thing for a woman, especially when it threatens the fragile egos of those in power. You glance at Marjorie, her eyes hard as she recounts the story, and feel a chill despite the cottage's warmth. You linger as Agnes and Marjorie wrap up their meeting, their baskets heavy with shared herbs and hope. They're not just healers, They're keepers of a tradition that stretches back generations, a legacy of women who've turned plants into power despite every obstacle. A final joke. Why do women herbalists always win at cards? Because they've got an ace up their sleeve and chamomile in their pocket. You smile, but as you step back into the village, the weight of their resilience settles over you like a warm cloak. These women are more than their remedies, they're a force, quiet but unbreakable, holding their communities together with knowledge and nerve. You're ready to explore another corner of this world, perhaps where these remedies are crafted in quieter, holier places, far from the village's prying eyes and judgmental whispers. You leave the village behind, the warm laughter of Agnes and Marjorie fading as you trek toward a stone-walled monastery tucked in a quiet valley, its spire piercing the soft gray sky. The air smells of damp earth and pine, and you're about to explore how monks preserve ancient herbal knowledge in their cloistered gardens, far from the village's prying eyes. These aren't the herbalists like Agnes, dodging suspicious glares while mixing toad-skin tonics. These are scholarly men blending faith, science, and plants in a world of manuscripts and murmured prayers. You step through the monastery's heavy oak gate, its creak echoing in the stillness, and feel a shift like you're entering a sanctuary where time moves slower and every leaf holds a purpose. You're ready to see how this sacred space shapes the art of healing. You find yourself in a walled herb garden, rows of plants basking in the midday sun, their scents mingling in the crisp air. Brother Thomas, a monk with ink-stained fingers and a calm smile, tends to a patch of lavender, his coarse robes brushing the soil as he kneels. Monastic gardens like this are the beating heart of medieval medicine, where monks cultivate herbs for both body and soul, creating a living pharmacy that hums with quiet power. A mainstream fact by the 9th century, monasteries across Europe, following the rule of Saint Benedict, maintained herb gardens, with the famous Plan of Saint Gaul outlining ideal layouts for medicinal plots, complete with beds for sage, mint, and rue. You watch Brother Thomas snip lavender with a small iron sickle. His movements deliberate as he explains it, soothes headaches and calms the spirit. His knowledge feels precise, almost academic. A far cry from Agnes's intuitive craft, back in that smoky village workshop. You can't help but admire the order here. The way each plant has its place, tended with a care that feels almost holy, but there's a quirky twist that catches you off guard. You notice Brother Thomas muttering a prayer over the lavender before cutting it, his lips moving softly as he asks for divine blessing to enhance its power. Monks often mix faith with their remedies, seeing plants as God's gifts to humanity, each leaf a small miracle. You spot a small cross carved into the garden's wooden gate, a reminder that every herb here is tended with reverence, as if God himself is watching. Historians still argue whether this spiritual approach was purely theological or a clever way to codify empirical knowledge under a religious lens. But you can't deny the serenity of the garden. It's like stepping into a sacred grove, with sage for digestion, mint for fevers, and rosemary for memory, all grown with a side of prayer. You breathe in the lavender's sharp sweetness, and for a moment, you get why Brother Thomas believes there's more to these plants than meets the eye. You follow him to the scriptorium, a dim, stone-walled room where monks copy ancient texts by flickering candlelight, the air heavy with the smell of parchment and wax. Brother Thomas shows you a worn manuscript, its pages filled with Latin descriptions of plants and their uses, carefully copied from Roman works like Pliny's Natural History or Dioscorides de Materia Medica. This is where herbal knowledge is preserved, not just for the monastery, but for future generations. A lifeline of wisdom in a world where knowledge can vanish with a single fire. You're struck by the care in every inked line, the monks' quills scratching softly as they work, their fingers cramped but steady. A joke to ease the quiet. Why do monks make the best herbalists? Because they've got patience for plants and parchment. You smile. But the truth is, these manuscripts are a bridge between past and present, keeping centuries-old wisdom alive when village healers like Agnes rely on memory and oral tradition. You wonder what Agnes would think of this place. Her tattered parchment scraps no match for these bound tomes. You wander back to the garden, where Brother Thomas points out a rare plant, hellebore. Its dark green leaves hiding a potency used for heart ailments but deadly in large doses. Monks, with access to texts and trade routes, often grow exotic herbs unavailable to village healers, making their gardens hubs of botanical diversity. You notice the garden's layout neat beds divided by purpose, culinary herbs like parsley, medicinal ones like comfrey, even spiritual herbs like frankincense for incense. It's a stark contrast to Agnes's chaotic drying racks, and you wonder if she'd envy this order or find it too rigid, too far from the wild forest she calls her teacher. Another joke, why's the monastery garden so tidy? Because even the weeds know to line up for prayers. You chuckle, but the precision here speaks to a deeper purpose. Monks see healing as a divine mission, every plant a piece of God's grand plan, tended with the same devotion they give to their psalms. You sit on a stone bench, the sun warming your back, and watch Brother Thomas water a row of chamomile, its tiny white flowers bobbing in the breeze. He tells you how monks share their remedies with nearby villages, offering salves or tonics to the poor who can't afford a physician's fees. It's charity, sure, but also a way to spread influence, tying communities to the monastery's spiritual and practical authority. You think back to Agnes, her work scrutinized by suspicious neighbors, and realize monks face less distrust, their robes and vows shielding them from accusations of witchcraft that haunt women like her. A final joke. Why don't monks worry about witch hunts? Because nobody suspects a guy with a tonsure of brewing trouble. You grin, but as you leave the garden, the scent of lavender lingers, and you feel the weight of this quiet, holy work preserving not just plants, but a legacy of healing that reaches far beyond these stone walls. You're ready to step back into the wider world, perhaps to see where trust in healers falters, and the line between cure and con begins to blur. You step away from the monastery's orderly gardens, the soothing scent of lavender fading as you return to the bustling village, where the air hums with market chatter, the clatter of carts, and the distant lowing of cattle. You're about to dive into the murky world of quackery, where charlatans peddle fake cures alongside genuine healers like Agnes, muddying the waters of trust in a medieval world where hope is as precious as gold. It's a risky business. Trust is hard won, and not every healer with a basket of herbs is what they seem. You weave through the crowded market square, your eyes drawn to a flashy stall where a smooth-talking stranger hawks a miracle elixir, his voice cutting through the din like a knife. You're ready to see how these tricksters exploit desperation, casting shadows over the careful work of herbalists like Agnes. You pause at the stall, where a man in a garish cloak, embroidered with stars to scream mystical, waves a vial of murky liquid, claiming it cures everything from warts to heartbreak. The crowd leans in, half curious, half skeptical, as he spins tales of exotic herbs from distant lands, places no villager has ever seen. A mainstream fact by the 14th century. Quackery was rampant across Europe, with traveling healers exploiting desperate patients, as noted in court records from England and France that document fraudsters fined for selling sugar water or colored vinegar as medicine. You watch a farmer, his hands rough from plowing, hand over a precious copper coin for the elixir, his eyes bright with hope for his ailing wife. You can't help but wince Knowing it's likely just flavored water or worse, Agnes, with her comfrey salves and fever-few teas, would scoff at this nonsense. But the crowd's desperation makes them easy prey, and you feel a pang of frustration at how easily trust is bought with a loud voice and a shiny vial. There's a quirky twist that makes you raise an eyebrow. The charlatan tosses a dried lizard foot into his pitch, swearing it banishes evil humors and strengthens the soul. You're torn between laughing and cringing medieval quacks often used bizarre props to dazzle their marks. From fake unicorn horns to blessed stones supposedly dug up under a full moon. You recall that toad skin tonic Agnes made back in her workshop, which seemed odd, but was at least rooted in generations of trial and error. This lizard foot, though it's pure theater, a prop to make the crowd gasp and loosen their purse strings. Historians still argue whether some quacks genuinely believed their own hype or were just cunning con artists. But you're betting on the latter as the man pockets another coin with a grin that's a bit too sharp. You glance across the square and catch Agnes's eye. She's watching the spectacle, her face tight with disapproval, knowing her reputation takes a hit every time one of these frauds rolls into town. You wander closer to Agnes, who's quietly bartering a nettle poultice with a weaver, her hands steady despite the chaos of the market. She mutters about the charlatan, saying his kind give honest herbalists a bad name, making villagers question every jar of salve or sip of tea. It's not just about lost trust. Quacks can do real harm. You overhear a grim story from the weaver about a villager who drank a miracle tonic last summer and ended up sicker, his fever spiking from whatever mystery sludge was in it, maybe moldy grain or worse. A joke to lighten the mood. Why do quacks love a good crowd? Because it's easier to sell snake oil when everyone's distracted by the snake. You chuckle. But the truth is grim without regulation or guilds to police them. Anyone can claim to be a healer, and the line between Agnes's careful craft and a huckster's scam is blurry to most villagers. You feel for Agnes, her years of knowledge overshadowed by a loudmouth with a lizard foot and a knack for storytelling. You notice the crowd thinning as the charlatan's promises grow wilder, curing blindness, banishing demons, even promising eternal youth. Some villagers walk away, muttering about too good to be true, but others linger, clutching their coins, their eyes desperate for a miracle. It's a stark reminder of how much people crave hope, especially when a child's sick or a wound won't heal. Agnes's remedies, like that chamomile tea you saw her give the widow for free, rely on tested knowledge, but they don't come with a salesman's flair or promises of instant cures. Another joke, why's a quack's stall so shiny? Because it's polished with promises and not much else. You smile, but you're starting to see the challenge Agnes faces. She's competing with showmen who'd rather dazzle than deliver. And her quiet competence doesn't always win the crowd's heart. You watch a young boy tug at his mother's sleeve, begging for the elixir to help his sick sister, and your heart sinks, knowing Agnes's whorehound syrup would likely do more good if only they'd trust her. You follow Agnes back to her workshop, the charlatan's voice fading into the market's din as you cross the muddy square. She's frustrated but focused, grinding yarrow for a salve while muttering about fools and their fake cures. You realize the stakes are higher than you thought. Herbalists like her don't just fight illness. They fight to be trusted in a world where frauds flourish like weeds. A final joke. Why don't quacks ever stay long? Because even the village chickens can smell a bad egg. You grin, but as you watch Agnes work, her hands steady despite the chaos outside, you're struck by her resilience. She's not just a healer. She's a beacon of truth in a market full of lies. Her remedies grounded in knowledge while others peddle hope wrapped in deceit. You're curious to see how her craft holds up in a world where even the stars are thought to guide healing hands, and where belief can be as powerful and dangerous as any potion. You're back in Agnes's workshop, the market's clamor and that charlatan's lizard foot nonsense fading as the familiar scent of crushed herbs, lavender, yarrow, A hint of that nettle poultice wraps around you like a warm, earthy blanket. You're about to dive into a stranger aspect of her world, how the stars guide her healing hands, turning her craft into a cosmic dance. In medieval times, astrology isn't just for predicting your love life or whether you'll win at dice. It's a serious tool for medicine, shaping when and how herbalists like Agnes Harvest mix or administer their remedies. You watch her glance at the sky through a narrow, grimy window, checking the moon's phase before reaching for a jar of feverfew, and you're ready to learn how the cosmos weaves into her gritty, plant-filled world. It's a blend of mysticism and method that feels both alien and oddly compelling. You lean closer as Agnes pulls out a tattered almanac, its pages yellowed and marked with cryptic symbols, circles, arrows, and tiny drawing of stars and planets. She explains that the heavens dictate the best times to work her craft, when to pick herbs, when to brew tonics, even when to apply a poultice. A mainstream fact by the 13th century, astrology was deeply integrated into European medicine, with texts like the Taquinum Sanitatis linking planetary alignments to the body's health and the efficacy of treatments. For Agnes, a fever tonic works best under a waxing moon, when the body's humors, those medieval notions of blood, phlegm and bile, are thought to rise, making the medicine more potent. Your skeptical, modern science would roll its eyes at this, but as she points to a chart showing Venus in ascendance, her finger tracing a smudged line of ink, you can't deny the conviction in her voice. She's not just brewing. She's aligning her work with the heavens, as if the stars are whispering instructions to her mortar and pestle. There's a quirky detail that makes you pause and tilt your head. Agnes insists on picking chamomile when Jupiter is prominent in the sky, claiming it boosts the herb's soothing spirit for calming nerves or sleepless nights. She even ties a blue thread around the stems to capture Jupiter's influence, a ritual that feels like something out of a fairy tale. It sounds like cosmic overkill, but this belief in celestial power is everywhere. Village healers, monks in their orderly gardens, even university-trained physicians swear by it. Historians still argue whether astrology was a genuine attempt to understand health through observation or just a way to impose order on a chaotic world where illness strikes without warning. You're leaning toward the latter, but you see its pull. Agnes's almanac, dog-eared and stained with herb juice, is as vital as her knife or that moon amulet you saw her tap. You try to peek at the almanac's pages, but she gently closes it, apparently. The stars don't like nosy guests. You're starting to wonder if there's some placebo magic in her star-timed tonics, making patients feel better just because they trust the heavens are on their side. You watch her prepare a salve for joint pain, her eyes flicking to the almanac to ensure Mars isn't in a bad mood, apparently. It could make the patient's inflammation worse, like throwing kindling on a fire. She mutters a chant to appease the stars, her voice low and rhythmic, and you're torn between amusement and awe. A joke to break the spell. Why do herbalists love stargazing? Because the moon's their boss, and it's always changing its mind. You grin. But there's truth here. Astrology gives Agnes a framework, a way to time her work when science is more guesswork than precision. You notice her adjust the salve's ingredients, adding extra rosemary because Saturn's in play, which she says governs bones and joints. It's a dizzying mix of plant and planet, and you're impressed by how seamlessly she blends them, her hands moving with the same care whether she's grinding herbs or consulting the stars. You try to follow her logic, but the zodiac symbols swim before your eyes, and you're just glad she's the one keeping track. You step outside with her at dusk, the sky unfurling like a tapestry of stars, pinpricks of light against a deepening blue. She points out constellations, her finger tracing Orion's belt and the faint glow of Venus, explaining how the zodiac signs govern different body parts: Leo for the heart, Pisces for the feet, Virgo for the gut. It's not just her. The whole village buys into this, asking for remedies when the stars are right for their ailment. Another joke. Why's the herbalist's schedule so hectic? Because she's got to wait for the stars to clock in before she can start brewing. You chuckle. But you see how this belief shapes trust. Villagers feel safer knowing their fever tea was mixed under a favorable moon, as if the cosmos itself is rooting for their recovery. It's less about the herb's chemistry and more about the comfort of cosmic order in a world where illness feels like chaos. You stand there, the evening chill creeping in, and feel a strange respect for this starry logic, even if it's hard to swallow. Back in the workshop, Agnes finishes the salve, wrapping it in linen and marking it with a tiny star symbol scratched into the cloth. You realize astrology isn't just superstition, it's a language, a way to make sense of suffering when answers are scarce and death is a frequent visitor. A final joke. Why don't herbalists argue with the stars? Because they're the only ones who always show up on time. You smile, but as you watch Agnes tidy her almanac, tucking it beside her jar of mandrake, you're struck by her faith in this celestial dance. It's not just about healing bodies, it's about connecting earth to sky, giving hope a cosmic anchor in a world where a fever can steal a life overnight. You're ready to see her skills tested in grittier circumstances, perhaps where wounds are deeper and the stars alone aren't enough to guide her hands through the chaos of survival. You're back in Agnes's workshop, the market's clamor and the charlatan's lizard-foot antics, now a distant hum as you sink into the familiar embrace of her herb-scented sanctuary. The air is heavy with lavender, yarrow, and the faint, sharp tang of that nettle poultice, grounding you as you prepare to explore a peculiar facet of her craft, the role of astrology in medieval healing. In this world, the stars aren't just for dreamy stargazers or fortune-tellers. They're a serious guide for medicine, dictating when herbalists like Agnes harvest, mix, or administer their remedies. You watch her glance at the sky through a narrow, grimy window, her eyes narrowing as she checks the moon's phase before reaching for a jar of feverfew, and you're ready to unravel how the cosmos weaves into her earthy, practical world. It's a blend of mysticism and method that feels both alien and strangely captivating, like a puzzle you're itching to solve. You lean in as Agnes pulls out a tattered almanac, its pages yellowed, curling at the edges, and marked with cryptic symbols, circles, arrows, and tiny sketches of stars and planets that look like they've been inked by a trembling hand. She explains that the heavens are her silent partners, dictating the best moments to work her craft, when to pick herbs, when to brew tonics, even when to apply a poultice to a swollen ankle. A mainstream fact by the 13th century, astrology was deeply woven into European medicine, with texts like the Taquinum Sanitatis linking planetary alignments to the body's health and the potency of treatments. For Agnes, a fever tonic is most effective under a waxing moon, when the body's humors, those medieval notions of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile are thought to rise, making the medicine sink deeper into the patient's system. You're skeptical. Modern science would dismiss this as fanciful, but as she points to a chart showing Venus in ascendance, her finger tracing a smudged line of ink, you can't ignore the quiet certainty in her voice. She's not just brewing, she's orchestrating a delicate dance with the heavens, as if the stars are whispering secrets to her mortar and pestle. There's a quirky detail that makes you pause and tilt your head, a smile tugging at your lips. Agnes insists on picking chamomile when Jupiter is prominent in the sky, claiming it amplifies the herb's soothing spirit for calming frayed nerves or coaxing sleep from restless minds. She even ties a blue thread around the stems to capture Jupiter's influence, a ritual that feels like it belongs in a fairy tale rather than a healer's workshop. It sounds like cosmic overkill, but this belief in celestial power is woven into the fabric of her world village healers. Monks in their tidy monastery gardens, even university-trained physicians in far-off cities swear by it. Historians still debate whether astrology was a genuine attempt to understand health through careful observation or simply a way to impose order on a world where illness strikes like a thief in the night. You're leaning toward the latter, but you feel its pull. Agnes's almanac, dog-eared and stained with herb juice, is as essential as her knife or that crescent moon amulet you saw her tap for luck. You try to sneak a peek at the almanac's pages, curious about those cryptic symbols, but she gently closes it with a knowing smile, apparently. The stars don't appreciate nosy guests. You're starting to wonder if there's a kind of placebo magic in her star-timed tonics, making patients feel better simply because they trust the heavens are watching over them. You watch her prepare a salve for joint pain, her eyes flicking to the almanac to ensure Mars isn't in a foul mood, apparently. Its fiery influence could make the patient's inflammation flare, like tossing kindling on a smoldering fire. She mutters a chant to appease the stars, her voice low and rhythmic, weaving through the crackle of the workshop's fire, and you're caught between amusement and awe. A joke to break the spell. Why do herbalists love stargazing? Because the moon's their boss, and it's always changing its mind. You grin. But there's a deeper truth here. Astrology gives Agnes a framework, a way to time her work in an era where medical science is more guesswork than precision. You notice her adjust the salve's ingredients, adding an extra pinch of rosemary because Saturn's in play, which she says governs bones and joints, lending the salve a steady, grounding strength. It's a dizzying blend of plant and planet, and you're quietly impressed by how seamlessly she juggles them, her hands moving with the same care whether she's grinding herbs or consulting her starry guide. You try to follow her logic, but the zodiac symbols, squiggles for Aries, loops for Libra, swim before your eyes, and you're just glad she's the one keeping track of the cosmic calendar. You step outside with her at dusk, the sky unfurling like a vast tapestry of stars, pinpricks of light against a deepening blue that feels infinite. She points out constellations, her finger tracing the bold lines of Orion's belt and the soft glow of Venus, explaining how the zodiac signs govern different body parts: Leo for the heart, Pisces for the feet, Virgo for the gut. It's not just her. The whole village buys into this celestial map, asking for remedies when the stars are right for their ailment, as if the cosmos holds a timetable for healing. Another joke. Why's the herbalist's schedule so hectic? Because she's got to wait for the stars to clock in before she can start brewing. You chuckle, but you see how this belief shapes trust. Villagers feel safer knowing their fever tea was mixed under a favorable moon, as if the cosmos itself is rooting for their recovery. It's less about the herb's chemical compounds and more about the comfort of cosmic order in a world where illness feels like chaos, where a cough can spiral into a deathbed in days. You stand there, the evening chill creeping through your cloak, and feel a strange respect for this starry logic, even if it's hard to swallow through a modern lens. Back in the workshop, Agnes finishes the salve, wrapping it in linen and marking it with a tiny star symbol scratched into the cloth with her knife. You realize astrology isn't just superstition, it's a language, a way to make sense of suffering when answers are scarce and death is a frequent, uninvited guest. A final joke. Why don't herbalists argue with the stars because they're the only ones who always show up on time? You smile. But as you watch Agnes tidy her almanac, tucking it carefully beside her jar of mandrake, you're struck by her unwavering faith in this celestial dance. It's not just about healing bodies, it's about connecting earth to sky, giving hope a cosmic anchor in a world where a fever can steal a life overnight. You're ready to see her skills tested in grittier circumstances, perhaps where wounds run deeper, battle scars, plague fevers, or broken bones, and the stars alone aren't enough to guide her steady hands through the raw chaos of survival. You're still in Agnes's workshop, the star-marked salve resting on her scarred workbench as the fire crackles softly, casting flickering shadows across jars of dried herbs. The almanac's cosmic whispers linger in your mind, but now you're plunging into the grittier, blood-soaked side of her craft, treating battlefield wounds, where blood, bone, and raw desperation test her skills far beyond herbs and starry alignments. A sudden commotion outside snaps you alert. A rider gallops through the village, his horse lathered, shouting news of a skirmish nearby. Bandits ambushed a merchant caravan on the forest road, leaving wounded men limping back, their lives hanging by a thread. Agnes's face sets like stone. She grabs her basket, stuffing it with yarrow, comfrey, and linen strips, and you follow her out the door, heart pounding as you head to the village green, where chaos and cries await. You're about to see her face the raw, unrelenting edge of survival, where every choice is a gamble against death. You reach the green, a patch of trampled grass now a grim stage for suffering. Injured men groan on makeshift pallets of straw and cloaks, their faces pale under streaks of dirt and blood. The air reeks of iron, sweat, and fear, a far cry from the workshop's earthy calm. Agnes kneels beside a young guard, barely more than a boy, with a deep gash across his thigh, blood soaking his torn breeches and pooling in the grass. She works with a speed you haven't seen before, rinsing the wound with boiled water mixed with yarrow, its sharp scent cutting through the stench. A mainstream fact medieval herbalists used yarrow, often called soldier's woundwort, extensively for battlefield injuries, as noted in texts like the Herbarium of Pseudo Apuleius, which praises its hemostatic properties for staunching blood flow. You watch her pack the wound with a poultice of crushed yarrow and plantain, the latter known for drawing out infection, her hands steady despite the guard's pained cries and the chaos around her. It's messy, urgent work, and you're struck by her calm under pressure, her focus as sharp as the knife at her belt. The poultice looks like a green mash, but the bleeding slows, and you can't help but marvel at how such simple plants wield such power in her hands. But there's a quirky twist that catches you off guard, making you blink in disbelief. As she binds the poultice with linen, Agnes sprinkles a pinch of powdered bone cow. She mutters under her breath into the mix, claiming it binds the flesh to the spirit. You recall her toadskin tonic, which seems strange enough, but this feels even odder in the frantic blur of blood and bandages. Medieval wound care often mixed practical herbs with symbolic ingredients, believed to channel healing forces or align the body with unseen energies. Though historians debate whether this was pure superstition or a placebo to boost the patient's morale, you're not sure what to think, but the guard seems to relax as Agnes murmurs a charm, her voice low and soothing, cutting through his pain like a cool breeze. You wonder if belief is hers, or both, is as crucial as the yarrow in keeping him alive, a kind of invisible medicine woven into her work. You catch her eye, and she gives a slight nod, as if to say, it's all part of the craft. Before moving to the next man, you follow her to another pallet, where a grizzled man lies, his arm mangled from a bandit's axe, the bone exposed and splintered, gleaming white against torn flesh. Agnes's face tightens. She knows this is beyond her herbs, no matter how potent. She applies a comfrey salve, known as knitbone for its tissue-repairing properties, to reduce swelling, and binds the arm tightly with linen strips, but she whispers to you that he needs a surgeon, a rarity in these rural parts. A joke to ease the crushing tension. Why don't herbalists play chess? Because they're too busy patching up the nights. You force a smile. But the truth is, grim herbalists like Agnes are often the only help available. Their remedies a thin, fragile line against death's advance. You see her give the man a poppy seed tea, its sedative power documented in medieval texts like the Antidotarium Nicolai, and his eyes grow heavy, his groans softening as the pain ebbs. It buys her time to move on, but you feel the weight of her limits, the stark reality that herbs can't mend shattered bones or outrun fate. You notice the villagers gathered around, some praying, others clutching wooden charms or rosaries, their faces a mix of hope and dread. Agnes's reputation is on the line save these men, and she's a hero, a beacon of the village's resilience. Lose them, and those whispers of witchcraft you heard in the market could flare into something uglier. She works tirelessly, stitching a shallow cut on a man's shoulder with flax thread, her needle flashing in the fading light, and applying honey to a burn on another's hand. Its antibacterial properties a quiet miracle she doesn't bother to explain. Another joke to keep your spirits up. Why's the herbalist's basket bottomless? Because wounds never stop coming, like rain in spring. You chuckle, but you feel the weight of her role. She's not just healing, she's holding the village's hope together with every bandage, every murmured charm. You see a woman, likely the young guard's mother, watching Agnes with wide eyes, her hands clasped as if praying to both God and the herbalist. It's a reminder of the trust Agnes carries, a burden as heavy as her basket. As night falls, the green grows quieter, the groans softer as men slip into fitful sleep or fevered delirium. Agnes finishes her rounds, exhaustion carving deep lines into her face, her hands stained with blood and herb juice. Most men stabilize, their wounds bound and salved, though the one with a broken arm remains feverish, his breaths shallow. You realize her craft, even with its quirks like that powdered bone, is a lifeline in a world where wounds are as common as rain and death waits in every shadow. A final joke. Why do herbalists sleep so soundly? Because they've already fought the day's battles with nothing but plants and nerve. You look at Agnes, her hands bloodied but unyielding, and feel a surge of awe. Her work doesn't end here. You're ready to see how she faces even darker threats, like the creeping shadow of plague, where no herb, charm, or star can guarantee survival. And the village's faith in her will be tested to its breaking point. You stand on the village green, the night air thick with the acrid tang of blood, yarrow, and the faint, lingering smoke of torches. Agnes wipes her bloodied hands on her worn apron, her work on the wounded caravan guards done for now, their groans fading into fitful sleep or fevered murmurs. But a darker, more insidious shadow looms over the village whispers of plague in a neighboring town, carried by a peddler who passed through days ago, his cart rattling with wares and, perhaps, death. Fear ripples through the villagers, their faces pale in the moonlight, and Agnes is called to prepare for the worst, her role as herbalist, now a beacon in a storm of panic. You follow her back to her workshop, your heart heavy with the weight of what's coming, ready to see how her herbal craft faces a foe no star, salve, or charm can easily defeat a merciless, invisible killer that spares neither rich nor poor. This is a battle where survival is a desperate gamble, and you're about to witness Agnes at her most tested. Inside the workshop, Agnes lights a rushlight, its weak flicker casting long shadows across shelves, crammed with jars of dried herbs. Their labels smudged but familiar. She moves with purpose, pulling down garlic, wormwood, and rue, her hands sorting through bundles with a quiet urgency. She's crafting posets, fumigants, and poultices, remedies to ward off the pestilent air believed to carry the plague's deadly touch. A mainstream fact during the 14th century Black Death. Herbalists relied on miasma theory, the idea that disease spread through foul air, using strong-smelling plants like rue and rosemary, to purify their surroundings. As recorded in plague tracts like those of John of Burgundy or the Compendium de Epidemia, you watch her crush garlic into a pungent paste, mixing it with vinegar to form a poultice she says strengthens the body's defenses against the creeping sickness. Her hands shake slightly, not fear. You realize, but the urgency of a woman who knows time is slipping away. You feel the weight of a village pinning its hopes on her, their trust both a lifeline and a burden as heavy as the plague itself. The garlic's sharp scent stings your eyes, but it's a reminder of her determination, her refusal to stand idle against an enemy she can't see. A quirky twist catches your eye, adding a layer of strangeness to the grim scene. Agnes hangs bundles of wormwood at the workshop's door, their bitter scent mingling with the fire's smoke, and mutters under her breath that it repels the devil's breath. In this era, plague wasn't just a disease. It was seen as divine punishment or demonic work, a scourge sent to test or torment. Herbalists often blended practical remedies with spiritual protections, weaving charms and rituals into their work to combat both the physical and supernatural. Historians debate whether such practices were driven by deep faith or desperate attempts to calm panicked communities. But you see their power here. Villagers stop by, their faces drawn, clutching wooden crosses or knotted charms, asking for wormwood to hang in their homes, believing it might shield them from the plague's grasp. Agnes gives it freely, her face grim but kind, her eyes meeting theirs with a steadiness that seems to anchor their fear. You wonder if hope, not just herbs, is her true weapon against the despair that creeps in with every whispered rumor of death. The wormwood sways in the draught, and you can't help but feel a chill, as if the devil's breath is closer than you'd like to think. You trail her to the churchyard at dawn, where a crowd gathers, their voices hushed but edged with panic. Agnes distributes vinegar-soaked cloths, instructing villagers to hold them near their faces when passing sick houses. A crude mask against the miasma they believe carries the plague. She teaches them to burn rosemary in their hearths, its clean, sharp smoke a shield against infection, a practice rooted in centuries of tradition. A joke to cut the crushing tension. Why's the herbalist's workshop so smoky? Because she's trying to fumigate the plague and the devil in one go? You force a laugh. But the truth is stark. Her remedies are educated guesses, rooted in the wisdom of her mother and her mother's mother, but untested against a plague that kills half it touches, leaving blackened buboes and shattered families in its wake. You see fear in the villagers' eyes, even as they thank her, their hands trembling as they take the cloths or sprigs of rosemary. You realize her role is as much about courage as cures, about standing firm when others falter, offering hope when certainty is a luxury no one can afford. A young girl clutches her mother's skirt, staring at Agnes like she's a saint, and you feel the weight of that gaze, the fragile trust it carries. You return to the workshop, the churchyard's murmurs fading as Agnes brews a feverfew tea for herself, her posture sagging with exhaustion. She admits, in a rare moment of vulnerability, that the plague terrifies her. Her herbs can ease symptoms, reduce fevers, or soothe pain, but survival depends on luck, or God, or something beyond her tattered almanac and its starry charts. Another joke to lighten the heavy air. Why do herbalists keep so many herbs? Because even they don't know which one will outsmart death. You smile, but you feel her fragility. She's no miracle worker, just a woman armed with plants, grit, and a stubborn refusal to give up. The village trusts her, but you see the cost of that trust in her shadowed eyes, the way her hands linger on the feverfew jar as if seeking strength from its familiar scent. You think back to the wounded men on the green, their blood on her hands, and realize this is different. Plague doesn't bleed or scream. It creeps, silent and relentless, and every remedy she crafts is a prayer against an enemy she barely understands. As dawn breaks, a bell tolls from the church. Slow and mournful, a plague case confirmed in the village. A weaver's son found sweating and swollen in his bed. Agnes grabs her basket, stuffing it with garlic poultices, rue bundles, and a vial of rose water to cool fevers, her face set with a resolve that masks her fear. She's ready to tend the sick, knowing each visit risks her own life, each touch of a fevered brow, a roll of the dice. A final joke, why's the herbalist always busy? Because death never takes a holiday. You watch her step into the grey morning, her figure small against the mist, her basket swinging at her side, and feel a mix of dread and admiration. Her fight against the plague is just beginning, a battle where every remedy is a fragile prayer, every survivor a hard-won victory. You're ready to follow her into this grim, uncertain fray, where her craft, her courage, and the village's faith will be stretched to their breaking point, and the line between healer and hero blurs in the shadow of death. You trail Agnes through the misty village, her basket heavy with garlic poultices, rue bundles, and a vial of rose water, her steps brisk despite the dawn's grey chill and the weight of the task ahead. The church bell's mournful toll still echoes in your ears, a grim herald of the plague's arrival. A weaver's son, just 10 years old, lies feverish and swollen in his family's cottage. The air feels thick with dread, doors barred, and faces peer from shuttered windows, their eyes etched with fear, some crossing themselves as Agnes passes. You're about to witness her confront the plague head-on, her herbal craft, courage, and the village's fragile trust facing their ultimate test in a battle against a disease that defies stars, salves, and even the faint hope she clings to. The boy's life hangs by a thread, and Agnes must wield her knowledge in a fight where survival is a desperate roll of the dice against an invisible killer. You follow close, your heart thudding in your chest as the village holds its breath, waiting to see if her herbs can outwit a foe that spares neither child nor elder. You enter the weaver's cottage, a low thatched hovel where the stench of sickness hits like a physical blow, a sour mix of sweat, decay, and despair that clings to the air like damp rot. The boy writhes on a straw pallet, his skin slick with sweat, dark swellings bulging at his neck and armpits, the telltale buboes of the plague marking him as death's target. Agnes kneels beside him, her face a mask of calm but her eyes sharp, scanning every detail, his rapid pulse, his labored, rattling breaths, the fever burning through his thin, trembling frame. She applies a garlic vinegar poultice to the buboes, her hands deft as she presses the pungent, stinging mash against the swollen glands, hoping to draw out what she calls the poison of the pestilence. A mainstream fact medieval plague, Remedies, as documented in texts like the Regimen Sanitatis or the surgical writings of Guy de Chauliac, often relied on garlic and vinegar for their antimicrobial properties, though their effect on bubonic plague was limited at best. A faint spark against a relentless inferno. You watch her work, coaxing the boy to sip rose water mixed with hyssop, its cool, minty scent a fleeting relief against his fever, her voice soft but steady as she murmurs encouragements, promising he'll see the sun again. His mother hovers nearby, her hands twisting a tattered rag, whispering prayers to God, the Virgin, and any saint who might listen, her eyes locked on Agnes as if she's the only barrier between her son and the grave. You feel the crushing weight of their hope resting on Agnes's shoulders, a burden heavier than the basket at her side, heavier still than the fear you see flicker in her gaze when she thinks no one's watching. A quirky detail stands out, adding a strange, almost otherworldly layer to the grim scene. Agnes lights a small bundle of mugwort in the corner of the cottage, its acrid, bitter smoke curling upward like a prayer, and mutters under her breath that it cleanses the spirit's path. In this era, plague wasn't just a physical scourge, it was seen as divine punishment or demonic work, a test of faith or a curse woven by unseen forces. Herbalists often blended practical remedies with spiritual protections, using ritualistic herbs like mugwort to ease both body and soul, to ward off the malevolent spirits thought to ride the plague's coattails. Historians debate whether such practices were driven by deep conviction or desperate attempts to soothe panicked communities. But you see their power here. The boy's mother relaxes slightly, her shoulders easing as she watches the mugwort smoke drift toward the rafters, clinging to the ritual's promise like a drowning woman to a rope. You wonder if Agnes truly believes in the mugwort's spiritual power, or if she's simply giving the family something tangible to hold on to, a flicker of control in a world spiraling into chaos. Either way, the smoke weaves a fragile thread of calm through the room's despair. And you can't deny its effect. The mother's prayers grow steadier, her eyes less wild, her hands less frantic. You catch Agnes's glance, and she gives a faint nod, as if to say, sometimes hope is the medicine. Her face unreadable, but her eyes betraying a weary understanding of the stakes. You follow Agnes as she checks the boy's pulse, her fingers gentle but firm against his wrist, her brow furrowed as she counts the beats, her lips moving silently. She mutters about the stars Venus is waning. Not an ideal time for healing, she says. Her voice tinged with frustration, but there's no time to wait for a better sky when death is knocking at the door. She administers a feverfew and willow bark tea, known for reducing fever and easing pain. As noted in medieval herbals like the Bald's Leech book, its bitter taste making the boy grimace but swallow. But she whispers to you, her voice low so the mother won't hear, that the plague often outruns her remedies, a beast too swift for her herbs to catch, too cunning for her almanac's charts. A joke to ease the grim air. Why's the herbalist's job so tough? Because the plague doesn't read her almanac. You force a smile, but the boy's shallow. Rattling breaths underscore the brutal truth. Her herbs are a flicker of light against a tidal wave of death, a desperate stand against a foe that kills half it touches, leaving blackened marks and broken families in its wake. You see her wipe sweat from her brow, her own fear buried deep under layers of duty, her hands moving with a precision that betrays none of the doubt you know she feels. You think back to the battlefield wounds on the village green, bloody but tangible, something her yarrow and comfrey could grip. This is different, a creeping enemy that hides in breath and touch, and every move Agnes makes is a gamble with her own life. Each poultice a prayer against the odds. The village watches from a safe distance, some leaving bread, eggs, or a jug of ale at the cottage door, offerings of gratitude or desperate pleas for protection, while others shun the house, fearing contagion will leap from its walls like a thief. Agnes's reputation teeters on a knife's edge save this boy, and she's a savior, a near holy figure whose name will be blessed in every hearth. Lose him, and those whispers of witchcraft you heard in the market, muttered by suspicious tongues, could flare into accusations, tortures, and worse. She stays through the night, tending the boy with relentless focus, applying fresh poultices as the old ones darken with discharge, burning more mugwort to keep the air pure, its smoke stinging your eyes but steadying your nerves. Another joke to keep your spirits from sinking. Why's the herbalist's lamp always burning? Because she's fighting shadows no one else can see. You admire her grit, but the boy's fever spikes as midnight passes, his skin burning hotter, his whimpers turning to cries, and doubt creeps into your chest. Can herbs, even in her skilled hands, stand against this merciless killer? You see the mother's eyes dart to Agnes, searching for a sign of hope, and you realize the herbalist's role is as much about carrying that hope as crafting cures. a weight that could crush anyone less stubborn than this woman with her stained apron and steady hands. By morning, a faint miracle breaks through the gloom. The boy's breathing steadies, his fever easing just enough to spark a fragile hope. Though he's far from out of danger, his body still frail, his buboes still swollen. Agnes slumps against the cottage wall, exhaustion carving deep lines into her face, her hands trembling as she ties off a fresh bandage, her apron stiff with sweat and grime. She knows more cases may come, each one a new battle in a war with no end in sight, each sickbed a test of her craft and her nerve. A final joke, why's the herbalist never alone, because hope and fear are always at her side. Like ghosts she can't shake. You watch her pack her basket, ready for the next call. Her movements slow but resolute, her eyes shadowed but unyielding. You feel a surge of awe. She's not just an herbalist. She's a warrior, armed with plants, grit, and a defiance that burns brighter than her rushlight. Her fight against the plague is a war of small, fragile battles. Each life saved a miracle, each loss a scar on her soul. You're ready to follow her deeper into this grim, uncertain fray, where her craft, her courage, and the village's faith will be stretched to their breaking point, and every step is a quiet, stubborn defiance of the death that stalks them all. You step out of the weaver's cottage, the boy's steadier breaths a faint, fragile victory that feels like a candle flickering in a storm. The village is shrouded in mist, its streets eerily quiet, as if holding its breath against the plague's tightening grip. Agnes's basket swings at her side, lighter now, her supplies of garlic, rue, and rosewater dwindling with every sickbed she visits. Rumors of more plague cases swirl like smoke. 2 more households reporting fevers, their doors marked with chalk to warn others away. You follow her through the mud-churned lanes, the air heavy with fear, ready to see how she battles on. Her herbs and grit stretched thinner with each passing hour. This is her crucible, where every choice tests her craft, her courage, and the village's faltering trust. As the plague weaves its deadly web through homes and hearts, you're about to witness Agnes push to her limits, where hope is a luxury and survival a merciless gamble. You enter the tanner's house, a dim, leather-scented hovel where a woman lies on a straw pallet, her skin gray as ash, buboes swelling at her groin like dark omens. Agnes kneels beside her, applying a fresh garlic vinegar poultice, the sharp stench cutting through the room's sour air. She works with a quiet intensity, but the woman's fever burns fierce, her eyes glassy and distant, her breaths shallow and uneven. Agnes dribbles elderberry syrup between her cracked lips, citing its use for easing breathing difficulties. A remedy noted in plague texts like the Compendium de Epidemia. A mainstream fact elderberry was valued in 14th century herbals, such as the Herbarium of Pseudo-Apuleius, for respiratory relief, though it was powerless to halt the plague's relentless march through the body. You watch Agnes's hands, steady but slower now, her face etched with a focus that masks the strain you see in her tightened jaw, her shadowed eyes. Each case chips away at her hope, each fevered brow a reminder of her craft's limits. You feel the weight of the tanner's wife's life pressing down on her, a burden she carries without complaint, though you notice her pause, just for a moment, to steady her breath before moving on. A quirky twist catches your attention, adding a strange, almost poignant layer to the grim scene. Agnes ties a red thread around the woman's wrist, her fingers deft as she knots it, whispering that it holds the soul fast against death's pull. Such rituals, blending herbcraft with superstition, were common in medieval healing, meant to anchor life when disease threatened to drag it away. Historians debate whether these acts were for the patient's comfort, the family's solace, or the healer's own resolve, but you see their power here. The woman's husband, a burly man with hands stained from years of tanning hides, nods solemnly, clutching the thread's promise as if it's a charm against the inevitable. You wonder if Agnes leans on these rituals to steady herself, her own fear lurking beneath her calm exterior. A fear she buries under layers of duty and determination. The red thread is a small thing, a fragile splash of color in the dim room, but it feels like a lifeline, a silent prayer woven into her work. You catch her eye, and she offers a faint, weary smile, as if acknowledging the ritual's weight and its necessity in a world where herbs alone aren't enough. You move with her to the next house, a cramped dwelling where a child, no older than 6, lies coughing on a pallet. Her cheeks flushed with fever, but no buboes visible, yet a flicker of hope, or perhaps just a delay. Agnes brews a horehound tea, its bitter steam filling the air, known for soothing coughs and clearing lungs, as noted in texts like the Antidotarium Nicolai. She burns a handful of thyme in a clay dish, its clean, sharp smoke curling upward to purify the room's pestilent air. You notice her rationing her herbs now, her jars nearly empty, her once abundant stores of feverfew and rue reduced to scraps. A joke to break the suffocating gloom. Why's the herbalist's garden so bare? Because the plague's hungrier than a goat. You smile, but the child's weak. Rasping coughs underscore the stakes. Every remedy is a guess. Every patient to gamble against a disease that doesn't play fair. You see villagers leave offerings at Agnes's workshop, door bread. A hen, a jug of ale, tokens of gratitude or pleas for her to keep fighting. But you also hear mutters, sharp and bitter, from those who blame her for not stopping the plague's spread, their fear twisting into suspicion. The village is fracturing, neighbor turning against neighbor, and Agnes walks a perilous line where trust is as fragile as the child's next breath. The village's fear is turning ugly, and Agnes's role grows ever more dangerous. As you pass the tavern, a man stumbles out, his face red with ale and grief, shouting that Agnes is cursed, that his wife died despite her salves and teas. He jabs a finger at her, his voice carrying across the square, drawing eyes from windows and doorways. Agnes faces him, unflinching, her voice low but firm, saying she does what she can with what God and the earth provide. The man falters, his anger crumbling into sobs. But you see Agnes's hands tremble later, back in the safety of her workshop, the weight of his words lingering like a bruise. Another joke to lighten the heavy air. Why's the herbalist's path so thorny? Because even heroes get pricked by doubt and blame. You admire her strength, but the plague's toll is brutal. 3 deaths today, the tanner's wife among them, her red thread no match for the disease's grip. Agnes keeps moving, tending the sick, risking her life with every visit to a fevered bedside, every touch of a swollen limb. You see her wipe her brow, her movements slower, her face paler, and a chill runs through you. She's pushing herself beyond exhaustion, beyond safety. By dusk, Agnes returns to her workshop, her eyes hollow, her apron stiff with sweat and grime. She brews a willow bark tea for herself, her hands shaking as she stirs, and you notice a flush on her cheeks, a faint sheen of sweat on her forehead, a fever starting, or just the weight of endless nights. She slumps by the hearth, her basket empty, her voice quiet as she admits she's running out of herbs, out of time, out of strength. A final joke. Why's the herbalist's fire still lit? Because she's burning for a fight she can't quit, even when death's shadow falls on her. You watch her, her figure small against the fire's glow, and feel a surge of dread. She's the village's shield, its stubborn heart. But who saves her when the plague turns its gaze her way? You're ready to follow her final stand, where the disease may claim its fiercest foe. and her legacy will be written in the lives she saved or lost in this merciless war against an enemy no herb can fully conquer. You sit by Agnes's hearth in her cramped workshop, the fire's flickering glow casting long shadows across her hollowed face, her cheeks flushed with a fever that's no longer just exhaustion. She sips a bitter willow bark tea, her hands trembling around the clay cup, her eyes glassy but still sharp with determination. The village reels under the plague's merciless grip, 5 more cases reported today. The churchyard swelling with fresh graves, the air thick with the tolling of bells and the wails of the bereaved. Her basket lies empty, its woven strands stained with herb juice and sweat, her jars of rue, feverfew and garlic scraped bare. Now, her own body betrays her. The fever she's fought in others taking root in her own bones. You're about to witness her final stand, where her herbal craft battles not just the plague, but her own fading strength, as the village's hope hinges on a healer who may not survive the night. This is Agnes's last fight, a testament to her courage, and you feel the weight of it pressing down, heavy as the smoke that lingers in the room. Agnes rises, unsteady on her feet, when a boy bangs on her door, gasping that the blacksmith's daughter has fallen ill, fevered and coughing, her chest rattling with each breath. She grabs the last scraps of her whorehound, mixing it with honey to soothe the girl's throat, her hands trembling but precise, as if muscle memory alone drives her now. A mainstream fact whorehound was prized in medieval herbals, like the herbarium of Pseudo-Apuleius, for easing respiratory ailments. Its bitter leaves a staple for coughs and congested lungs. But against the plague's brutal advance, it's a frail, faltering shield. You follow her to the blacksmith's house, watching her apply a mustard poultice to the girl's chest, the sharp, stinging warmth meant to draw out the pestilent humor. Her voice remains soothing, a low murmur promising the girl she'll see the spring, despite her own rasping breath. Each word costing her precious energy. You feel a knot of dread tighten in your chest. She's giving all she has, pouring her fading strength into others. Perhaps too much, her fever climbing with every step she takes. The girl's eyes flutter, calmed by Agnes's presence, and you marvel at how she holds despair at bay. Even as her own body falters, a quirky detail catches your eye, a small but poignant act in the dim, smoky room. Agnes slips a smooth, river-worn pebble under the girl's pillow, whispering that it grounds the spirit to the earth, keeping death's pull at bay. Such charms were common in medieval healing, tiny rituals meant to tether life when disease threatened to unravel it, blending herbcraft with a deeper, older magic. Historians argue whether these acts were for the patient's comfort, the family's solace, or the healer's own resolve. But you see their power here. The girl's father, a broad-shouldered man with soot-stained hands, clutches his rosary tighter, his eyes softening as he watches Agnes place the pebble, as if it's a talisman against the inevitable. You wonder if Agnes leans on these rituals to steady herself, her own fear of death's approach lurking beneath her calm exterior, a fear she buries under layers of duty and defiance. The pebble's simplicity is heartbreaking, a tiny, smooth stone against a plague that spares no one. Yet it carries a weight of hope you can't dismiss. You catch Agnes's glance, and she offers a faint, weary nod, as if sharing a silent truth sometimes. The smallest acts are the bravest. You follow her back to the workshop, her steps faltering, sweat beading on her brow despite the evening's chill. She tries to crush a handful of thyme for a fumigant, but her strength fails, her fingers slipping, and she leans heavily against the workbench, coughing a deep, wet sound that chills you to the bone. Villagers still come, desperate, banging on her door for salves or teas, their voices edged with panic, but others now shun her, whispering she's spreading the sickness. Her visits to sickbeds a curse rather than a cure. A joke to pierce the suffocating despair. Why is the herbalist's door always open? Because even death knocks politely before taking her. You force a laugh, but her cough worsens, and you see the telltale swellings at her neck buboes, dark and unmistakable. She's infected, her time measured in hours, yet she keeps mixing what little she has, scraping the last of her elderberry syrup for a neighbor's child. Her duty, a fire no fever can douse. You want to beg her to rest, to save herself, but you know she won't. Her life has been for others, and she won't stop now, even as death creeps closer. The village is a ghost of itself, its heart hollowed out by fear and loss. As you help Agnes carry a bundle of time to a sick house, a mob gathers in the square, their voices sharp with panic, torches flickering in the dusk. A man, his face twisted with grief, shouts that Agnes is to blame, that her herbs failed his son, that she's a witch bringing the plague upon them. The crowd murmurs, some nodding, their fear turning to anger, their trust in Agnes fraying under the weight of so many deaths. She faces them, fevered but fierce, her voice hoarse but steady, offering her last bundle of rue to calm their fears, saying she fights with what God and the earth give her. Another joke to keep your heart from breaking. Why is the herbalist so stubborn? Because she's outlasted worse curses than theirs. You admire her courage, but the mob disperses uneasily, their eyes lingering, and you fear they'll return with more than words. Back in the workshop, Agnes collapses onto a stool, her breath shallow, her hands clutching the workbench as another cough racks her frame. You realize she's fighting her final battle, not just against the plague, but against the village's turning tide, her legacy teetering on the edge of hero or scapegoat. By dawn, Agnes lies on her own pallet, too weak to rise, her skin burning, her breath a faint wheeze. She whispers her recipes to you, feverfew for fevers, yarrow for wounds, horehound for coughs, her voice fading but urgent. Her legacy, woven in the plants she's tended all her life. She asks you to carry on, to keep her craft alive for the village, her eyes pleading even as they grow dim. Her final joke, her voice barely a whisper. Why's the herbalist's heart so big? Because it's got room for every soul she saved. You hold her hand, tears falling as her breath fades, each pause longer until it stops. The plague claims her, its fiercest foe, but her courage lingers in the air, heavy as the mugwort's smoke she burned. You look at her empty basket, her tattered almanac, and feel a resolve harden within you. You're ready to honor her by keeping her craft alive, stepping into her role in a village forever changed by her sacrifice, where every remedy you mix will carry her name, her stubborn heart, and her unyielding fight against the dark.